Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So we're scheduled to start at 4 p.m. Pacific time. I think we'll wait a few minutes just for everyone to join in, and hopefully everyone is having a great summer. I think a lot of people might be on summer vacation, but either way, it's great to see a lot of attendees for this webinar. So if you could just, let us know just where you guys are from, where you guys are from joining, I think that would be very appreciated. And usually the messaging default is set to like just so only the host and panelists can see it. So if you can like, make the chat so everyone who is involved in this webinar can see it, that would be great. So, obviously I'm joining from Korea and Eric is joining from Vancouver, Canada. We also have Scott. Thanks for joining. Scott's also from Vancouver, and Robert is Vancouver as well. I'm actually from Vancouver. I used to live there for about 15 years. We have Francesco. He's joining us from Santa Monica. Max from Phoenix. Tiffany from Vegas. I think a lot of joins from the West Coast today. That's for sure. So okay, we got Connor from Philadelphia. I'll read. Nice. I think Olivier said we might have some issues with our voice. I'll see if I can fix that, make it a little bit better. Yeah, we also have Sam from Spain. Cool. Okay, guys, we're gonna get this webinar started. We want to try to keep it nice and short. We don't want to take too much of your time. But as always, thank you guys for joining this webinar. So we're going to start off with a quick introduction. So my name is Alex, and I'm the account manager. I'm joining here from our HQ, which is based out in Seoul, South Korea, and I'll be your main point of contact for anything, ProtoPie related, whether it be business or any technical issues that you may have. You can always feel free to reach out to me. And also joining me is Eric. Eric, do you want to just give a quick introduction?
Sure, yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Eric. I'm a creative technologist here at ProtoPie. My role here at ProtoPie is essentially just pushing the boundaries of the tool. So just finding applications into HMI or any simple applications or something like aviation, like I'll be demoing today.
Yeah, and then for the demo, I think like Eric and his team has been working on this for, quite a bit. And we're really excited to show you guys this demo. He gave me a sneak kind of preview last week and it looked really cool. So this is the agenda for the webinar today. So first, I'm going to briefly explain how ProtoPie works. I think most of you guys are pretty familiar with the tool. If you're not, it'll just be a very, ProtoPie one-on-one on the basic components of it. And then we're going to just dive straight into the live demo that Eric prepared. And at the end, we do have a Q&A session. So you guys can either, just choose to save your questions until the very end, but we also have a Q&A window, which is going to be answered live. So if you have any kind of questions that you want to ask right away on the spot, then you can always feel free to, ask through the chat. Okay, so let's start with what is ProtoPie? To simply put, ProtoPie is a tool that allows users to create interactive and functional prototypes without having to write a single line of code. So when you think about, the traditional product development cycle, often designers are limited by code and complex tools. And when they want to show a vision, so by lowering the technical barriers to hi-fi prototyping, we empower designers to be more creative and take true ownership of their ideas. So another thing that I wanted to point out is usually like the new tools these days with advances in AI and the design tools, they have made generating UI and interactions relatively easy. But the limitations that we still see appear when you need to create a UX that connects with external hardware. And that's really our strong suit, and what Eric prepared for us today should really drive this home. So how do we make prototyping easy? Our motto is we make prototyping as easy as pie. So it all starts with understanding the ProtoPie ecosystem. And first, it starts with your existing designs. You can use our import plugins to bring them over from whether it be Sketch or a Figma right into ProtoPie Studio. And now with our MCP, we can actually convert other files as well. If you're starting from something like Claude Design, you can bring that over to ProtoPie. And from there, the desktop studio app is where all the magic happens. This is where you make your changes, your interactions, your prototype. And from those of you who are designing mobile apps, we have that covered as well. With Prototype Player, which is a free app, you can preview your prototypes with the full native sensors and haptics of the device. And Prototype Cloud is where prototypes are shared, reviewed, and approved. So stakeholders can view and comment without needing to install anything. Dev handoff also happens here on Prototype Cloud. Interactions and recordings and auto-generated specs, so engineers know exactly what to build. And then we have ProtoPie Connect, and this is going to be the focus for the day. Connect is what makes ProtoPie fundamentally different from anything else in this space. So it lets you run prototypes on custom hardware, whether it be physical knobs, dials, buttons, Raspberry Pi, or Arduino, all connected and talking to the prototype in real time. So for example, for this aviation webinar we're having, the pilot flies the sim with a physical side stick, and the prototype reacts to the live aircraft state, altitude, flight mode, transition from hover to forward flight. So you're testing the real interaction, not a simulation of it. And Eric's going to, show how that works in just a bit. So how does the foundation actually work? It's extremely easy. Dare I say it's easy as pie. So we have at ProtoPie here, we believe any interactions can be created with just three components. So we have the object, we have the trigger, and we also have the response. So you can think of it as building a sentence. So as you can see in this little interaction we created, when you tap this square layer, it moves. So if you break this down a little bit, the object here is the square layer, and trigger is the action, which would be the tap, and the response is the result. So it moves. And we have these interaction pieces. I personally like to call this, or like the periodic table. And it's an overview of all the triggers and the responses in ProtoPie, which are the building blocks that power your hi-fi prototypes. And when you combine everything, you can get all of these fully interactive prototypes that are made with ProtoPie. And they're also shared in our community webpage online. So anything from IoT, mobile apps, HMI, cockpit experiences, you name it, we can do it. And last thing I want to touch up on before the demo, this year we've had a lot of new releases. So this is a kind of a brief timeline that I want to show you guys. ProtoPie AI was released in June. This allows our users to create interactions from prompts. And we also have Connect on Cloud, which is an extension of ProtoPie Connect. It's on a closed beta right now. So I can't, disclose too much information, but the idea is that it lets stakeholders from different locations around the world connect to the same prototype live. So, Eric's in Vancouver, I'm in Korea. We can both connect to the same prototype and work on it together through Connect on Cloud. And we released a MCP last month to help with the learning curve. And you can also generate code from the prototypes you create within ProtoPie. And last week we released ProtoPie Player on Harmony OS as well. So as you can see, guys, we've had a lot of very exciting releases this year so far, and there are plenty of more to come in Q4. So I encourage everyone to, give us a follow on LinkedIn, and we should be able to share some very exciting, releases in the future. So now I'm gonna hand it off here to Eric, and he's going to share the live demo.
Right. Thank you, Alex, for the introduction to ProtoPie. Um, yeah, first I'll start sharing my screen and also share my setup that I got over here. So desktop. All right. I think you guys are able to see my screen here. And that is basically where I am. This is my cockpit setup that I've got going on. So you'll notice a little bit, set you guys a little bit better view. So you notice I have a simulator going on a TV over there. That's the Microsoft Flight Simulator playing. Then I have two extended monitors with a tablet, my main computer on the left with ProPie Connect, and my joystick controllers for the flight. I'll just go through this right now a bit. Let me just resume this. So today we'll be flying the Joby eVTOL. The reason we picked this aircraft in specific is because it's like a easy version of a aircraft. So this also acts like a helicopter drone and also can act like a actual takeoff aircraft. So it's easier to build like a a prototype experience for this. So let me just go through each component one by one. So first thing you'll notice is, of course, the TV. That's a 6-inch TV that's playing the Microsoft Flight Simulator. And these two are desktop extension monitors. They are touchscreen. So it's extending from my computer. They're both Chrome browsers running as web. And these are the prototypes, two of the prototypes I made on ProtoPie Studio to replicate one-to-one to what we have in the Joby eVTOL. You'll also see a bottom left, there's also one tablet. I have this also mimicking the same design as what we have over there. This is the Garmin touchscreen controller, mimicking the Garmin touchscreen controller. This is obviously a tablet. And on the left, you'll see all the telemetry that's passing through from my Microsoft Flight Simulator to the ProtoPie Connect, so that will connect to our two monitors over here. A little more clarification on what these monitors are. The left one is the MFD, which is the multi-functional display. And here is the PFD, which is primary flight display, which is more common in the airplane. So if you're familiar with the cockpit, then you're probably familiar with this screen over here. This one is more specific to the Joby eVTOL, as you can see. Okay, with that said, let me start flying. So I'll put you guys back over here. And let's start flying. So first thing I can just, as I mentioned before, I can easily start this as a helicopter, or I can just start it as an airplane. First things first, I will, I'll check the GTC, see my flight plan. Today we're flying from New York to LaGuardia. So sorry, in New York, so from taking departure from John F. Kennedy Airport to LaGuardia. And then just flying back. And I'm gonna switch my flight mode from load to fly, switching my viewpoint, and I can just take off, and you'll already notice things are moving in my primary display monitor and primary flight display and the multi-functional display, same according to what we have on the screen. So this is just a helicopter. I will just now switch to a more normal flight takeoff. And once I'm taken off, I'll show the screen more closely, give you guys a closer view. Now I'm just going to push ahead to take off like that plane that just took off. So you'll notice my plane just changed from from helicopter mode to flight mode. And I'll just ease and take off over here. Let me bring you guys closer to the view. So you'll notice the monitors. So my PFD, no, sorry, MFD, you can see the power changing, the range, and also the flight control move changing according to what I have on the screen. So that's per my control. Also shows flight data in elapsed time. This is purely fully designed. The UI is designed and purely designed by me. And moving on to the PFD, which is also moves live. You can see the speedometer, you can see the altitude changing, the speed changing, and the compass direction changing alongside with the map, which is an embedded custom map box embedded that I'll go through more in detail. And then you will see on my left here, all the telemetry is just being pushed from the simulator to ProtoPie Connect so that I can get all these data live running in real time on my prototypes over here. And that's basically it. This is what I was excited to show you guys. And let me now pause this so I can explain this to you. All right. Now I'm just going to switch back to a different view. Okay, now let me just explain how I created this. Me and my team created it. So software requirements, of course, ProtoPie, ProtoPie Player and ProtoPie Studio. The player is running on the GTC tablet that was showing the flight plan. The studio is where I created all these prototypes. And through ProtoPie Connect is where we were getting the telemetry from the flight simulator to our specific prototypes. And of course, Visual Studio Code, but you can choose an IDE of your choice. And we will use Python. So what we created is a custom plugin, which acts like a bridge app between the flight simulator and ProtoPie Connect. So that is how we connect the code and the telemetry through to our prototypes. And going at the bottom, we have a browser of your choice. In our browser is what was playing all the multi-view prototypes. That way you can have as many screens, as many prototypes running at the same time. So you cannot just have like one, two, or maybe three screens of what have. You can have far more than that, like 4, 5, 6, basically virtually as many as you want. And Unity, if you notice on my MFD, there was a 3D model of the Jobby we created in Unity and we embedded in our prototype. I will go through it a little more. The simulator that we use is Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, but you could probably use any other simulator of your choice as long as it has telemetry passing through it. More on that later. Okay, now hardware. Hardware, as you notice, I showed all the hardware from where we are. Starting with the 2 touch desktop extension monitors. That's where I had the MFD and the PFD playing. So that reason why they're touch monitors is because if you need controls to like touch, tap, or interact with it, I didn't have much interaction except for like fly or load mode. but you can definitely add more interactions and responses there. So you can like actually touch and play around with a demo, giving a more immersive feel of a cockpit. And of course, the aviation joysticks to control the plane. Then I had the gaming computer because simulator is very strong and very heavy on the GPU. We needed a desktop that matched it. Also, you can have a normal monitor or a TV like me for a more immersive feel for the simulator. And lastly, the tablet. That's where I was running the Garmin touchscreen display. Okay, just showing the pipeline. Y'all are probably very familiar with this now. So TV and joysticks were connected to PC and purely the PC. And then we have the three prototypes that we created, and they're all connecting from PC through ProtoPie Connect over here. So giving a more better example, showing this exact screens that's being played over here. So here is a TV, joysticks connected to PC, then connecting to the MFD, GTC, and the MFD. Now just going over some setup in more detail. You'll see this MFD setup. All of these UI and everything is created by me, and the interactions were created by me and the team to simulate the experience one-to-one to how it is in Joby eVTOL. And this specific screen that we brought in was a Unity layer. It's a 3D layer where the propeller can also go down and straight up, depending on if you're on airplane mode or on helicopter mode. So it can also pass through messages and connect with Unity to control 3D animation and effects. Next screen is the PFD setup. So the left screen, of course, again, standard ProtoPie stuff. And on the right side, we brought in a web embedded layer. We use Mapbox to simulate a map, like a top-down view of the map, see your flight direction and where you're over. This is an actual map of where New York that we were at, a one-to-one location. We set the coordinates, put it on Mapbox. It gives us right there, and it moves according to where our heading is going towards as well. Now going to a little bit more technical, and for specifically in Microsoft Flight Simulator, they have a dev mode, and I found this window, behaviors. We found this windows where it shows all the telemetry, all variables that holds the value of the plane. So we're able to like take all that and put it in a custom plugin to able to extract that telemetry from the simulator to our prototype. And what we use in the code, we use the socket.io library for easy, simple in and out messaging from from the simulator to our prototypes. So you'll see sending messages is just simple socket.io, and receiving messages also is through socket.io library over here. And since once the terminal is running, you'll see all the telemetry that's coming through the simulator, transferring right at ProtoPie Connect, which you saw was the screen just running on and on and on very quickly. And that was all I needed, all I had to present. Now on to you guys for Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that webinar. It looked really fun, kind of flying in that simulator. You look like a pilot there, Eric. Maybe you chose the wrong career. You should have been a pilot, right? But I'm gonna be a little bit, because I know you guys have a lot of questions. Yeah, I know in even the question chat there were a few questions are asked, but I'm going to be a little bit selfish and ask him a question personally because, me being on the business side, unfortunately, I don't get to, I'm not as creative as all you guys, so I don't get to work on these projects myself personally. So like I'm a little bit curious there because it seems like a very complex project with all these different screens and API bridge connections, you're responding to hardware live. So how long did that project took you and your team to finish?
That's a very good question, Alex. We were a team of three, and because aviation was something on the newer side, we didn't have experience on. It took about a month and a half to create this whole setup. Not just the, I'm not saying just the screens, but the whole seating buck, the controllers, the setup, how the look and feel it needs to be. That took us a while. So we started with 2 weeks of, 3 weeks of research. That was most of our time. The prototype screens itself, the PFD and the MFD, they each took about a week to a week and a half to prototype. So get all the UI elements down. That took most of the time. Then hooking it up to exact telemetry and what numbers it needs to connect with, that took like the rest of the time it took in the week and a half for each. The GTC panel was very simple. We didn't add much functionality to it just to show the flight plan. That took like a day or two at most.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, so, for me, because like I said, I'm not really involved in these projects, so a month and a half might seem like, oh, it's took like a quite a long time. But like let's say, because if you were in the aviation, if you're like a design team in the aviation industry, if you didn't use ProtoPie, like how long do you think roughly this kind of type of prototype would take to make?
I am, so just going back to my background, I do not have aviation industry experience. I have been a UX designer in the past, so, but just thinking about how product, like normal product life cycle would be, not having ProPie in the middle, they will probably create all the UI screens and have a detailed screen by screen storyboard on how each and every elements will work, and then transfer and then try to hand that over to the dev team to code it out to create this cockpit like real one-to-one experience. That could probably take a lot more because development is involved and coding is involved. And then once it's created, it probably wouldn't be this level of refinement because, of course, community dev handoff with something this complex that requires a lot of interaction and responses would probably take forever. So that should easily take more than 4 to 6 months, probably.
So yeah. So like I think nowadays with like speed to market with the AI tools, everyone's about like, let's make things something quick. And maybe people might think, oh, adding a prototype is like an extra step. But in this kind of use case, what do you think are like maybe some benefits of, having testing it on something that, you were working on for the cockpit?
Yes, I'm gonna give a little more insight in terms of the car HMI experience since we've worked in a lot of our car HMI, and this is kind of very a bit similar in that regards because there's a big difference between designing for just simple screen applications or TV, where nobody's life is on the line and the reactions in interactions and animations can just take its own time. Um, Things in reality that's live one to one that where a person's life is could be in danger or could be at risk, that designing for something like that, it requires a lot more precision and accuracy. To get a more that kind of precision and accuracy in designing for it, a cockpit like experience that is design friendly, who knows about the experience, creates the experience, and can catch each and every little detail that could risk a person's life. I think that is the value of that is very crucial and very high compared to without just handing off to a developer and trying very hard of going back and months of explaining how exactly they want one single interaction to come play.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for answering my questions, Eric. Now we're gonna move on to the Q&A, guys. We've had like quite a bit of questions come in before the webinar, so we're gonna go through about five of those really quickly, and I promise we're gonna get to the questions that you guys asked as well. So the first question here is, sorry, one second. Can this setup work with other flight simulators, or is this specific to this one? I think, Connor actually had the
Mhm.
same question in the chat.
Mhm. That's a great question. Yes, the setup will work on most flight simulators. There's not a strict requirement for what kind of flight simulator you want to put. The only requirement is that as long as you're able to extract the telemetry from the simulator and be able to code it to send to ProtoPie, that's probably the most important part. Apart from that, like you can use any simulator whatsoever.
Okay, great. The second question we got is how much coding is actually needed to connect hardware and real-time flight data to a prototype?
Not much actually. It's pretty simple. The base of the custom plugin that we build on ProtoPie is based on Socket.io, which is a very simple in and out sending library. Uh, we have many. You can also create your one yourself that was custom to you. We have a lot of custom plugins out in our GitHub and in our public library for you to work with. So it's relatively simple. Otherwise, you can also reach out to us. We can help you build it out. We also have some skill MD files that you can just hook it up to your AI and be able to create that connection. For actual hardware, like the joystick, we have specific plugins already embedded inside our ProtoPie Connect. But if any joysticks that doesn't work, you can also create a custom plugin for those. And we are very happy to assist with that as well.
Okay. So for the third question, it says, how quickly can designers make changes to the prototype once the hardware and simulator are connected?
This is where I think is like really shines, where ProPie really shines. The changes you can make is almost basically instantaneously. Everything that you saw on my screen, I can just change like a quick button or maybe quick telemetry or reaction just instantaneously on ProPie Studio, and it will automatically reflect on the prototypes over here. That's the power of having a designer-friendly environment where a designer doesn't need to know code to create that experience for yourself. They can just simply change one UI or on Figma or one interaction on ProPie and be able to import that in this environment very quickly.
Okay, so how much delay is there between the simulator data and what you see in the prototype?
The delay is it's basically it's virtually instantaneous. There's as if you saw on my screen, ProPie Connect, it was just firing off very quickly. I think we set it to 1/4 or half a second that we maybe 1/4 of a second that we get every telemetry to get a more smooth view of our screens. We did like switch it to 1 second and 2 seconds range. We tried, but it was not coming as smooth of a change as we wanted. So we set it to like fractions of second to be able to get that um, smooth animation, which worked seamlessly. We did not have an issue with the latency or any delay.
Okay, cool. And the last question we had prepared was how does working with real hardware change what designers can learn from user testing?
Really, really important. I think it's a big thing about creating a cockpit experience that's coded out and then having like a pilot or someone to test it out versus like a more close one-to-one experience that a designer has created and then have a pilot or someone with more experience try it out. That way you will be able to save a lot more time in the product side life cycle. You don't have to go back to code programmers to change something, and most of what you already want in the experience is already there in the cockpit, so you can already test it out with real life users, and you'll be able to catch mistakes or you'll be able to find improvements a lot quicker and faster in your life cycle. product lifecycle.
Okay, great. So those are, that's it for the questions that we prepared. And, we actually have a lot of live questions from you guys that we got. So, Olivia, I saw your comment about, like a PC desktop player. And that's something that obviously we'll discuss internally and I'll let them know your feedback. And Max had a question about kind of any interesting learnings or best practices that are specific to UI inside cockpits.
This is for Max's question, correct? The any
Yep.
to specific UI insights cockpit. This is specifically to UI. There's not, I wouldn't specifically know because I'm not a UI designer, and especially I don't have experience designing UI in the aviation industry. What we have over here, the UI, it was what was released out in public by Joby eVTOL, and through their design systems and what they have shown, what they have released on Microsoft Simulator. We just created a one-to-one copy of that. Um, Something that could be a best practice for creating in a like more interaction or animation heavy in ProtoPie. Think about breaking down each and every moving component, like an interaction library sort of a component, like how you can break every small little interaction as a prototype of its own and bring it together as a bigger prototype screen. Just having that mindset while you're creating the UI, I think is going to be huge on when it comes to putting it all together. That's one thing we practice at ProtoPie.
Okay. All right, thanks for that answer, Eric. So Tiffany asked a question about Unity. So she was curious what Unity was used for.
Yes, good question. The Unity was the Joby eVTOL plane, 3D plane. Maybe I can show that a little bit closely again. Let me just maybe let me share my screen.
Yeah, 1 second.
Sharing my screen. Going back. So the 3D model over here, this one is specifically Unity. That's the Joby eVTOL 3D model. Let me switch this to, let me restart the flight. So you'll see the propellers are currently like pointed upwards right now. Just, and you'll see as it's going forward, the propellers went down. Now I'm stopping, the propellers went back up. So I'm trying to mimic the same animation as we have on the actual simulator. Over here, you'll see there's a 3D plane over there. And when I move forward, you'll notice the propeller slowly coming forward. Also, the propeller here has come forward live in 3D. So yeah, that's the animation that we tried by bringing Unity over here.
I think Bill kind of had an extension on that question there, Eric. He wanted to know how Unity window how is the Unity window incorporated into the ProtoPie?
How is Unity window incorporated in ProtoPie?
Yes.
Is Unity, we in our ProtoPie Connect, let me just pause this, it's making noise. In ProtoPie Connect, where we have the web view, we can show multiple different screens. If I go into one of these screens, sorry, just requiring multiple hands over here. Awkward setup. Okay, edit. You will notice I have the Unity layer. Where's my mouse? You have the Unity layer over here. It's essentially a the 3D model. You can add as many, you can add more web embedded live camera or Unity layer. You can have more Unity layers building up on it. Some of our, so depending on what's your use case, like most of our automotive HMI developers, they like having, they play around a lot with Unity and multiple layers of Unity. Be able to have it all in one screen that can talk to each other is was very handy and useful for them. So hence how this is how I incorporated Unity for this aviation cockpit demo.
All right, great.
Yes.
So I think Francesco here wants to know, Eric, if these were tested with real pilots at some point.
This specifically not tested with a real pilot. We didn't have access to real pilot hopping into this, um, but uh, we would love to have love to have more pilots try out a use case like this. So yeah, so your answer, just a quick answer, yes, no, haven't had a pilot try this out yet.
Mm-hmm. So I think we have a lot on about Unity, so we have a couple more questions there. So, Francesco is wondering, like, what is involved if I want to test other model aircraft? Do you need to create a 3D render in Unity before that? And what else needs to happen to apply this to other aircrafts?
Great question. Let me break it down. So
Because
first part was, do we need to create a 3D render in Unity? That depends on if your prototype even needs a 3D rendered aircraft. Like, for example, in a simulator, most screens do not have that 3D model of the Unity. Only Joby had that 3D model where they wanted more information to see where the propeller positioning is. Most aircraft don't have that 3D model, so you most likely wouldn't need Unity for that. All you will need is the simulator here that has the environment and where your plane can actually like fly. I can easily just create the same experience one-to-one for like an actual aircraft that's on a different plane for a Microsoft Flight Simulator. What we're trying to emphasize here is the interaction and the control panel, which affects a user experience, the user experience, yes. So I assume cockpit views and inputs change also from aircraft to aircraft. Yes, that's also correct. Depending on what the cockpit design is, what the aircraft is, the internal cockpit will can look very different from what I have over here. Before designing this, me and my team, we went to a aircraft simulator and we went to a Sierra flight, which is a smaller plane, and experienced the whole cockpit there. And that's very different from what we had created for this specific use case.
Okay, great. I think we have one more thing kind of related to Unity here. So Bill wants to know, since Unity is supported, do we support Unreal Engine as well?
Yes, we also do support Unreal Engine. That's newer on our. That's we had Unity much longer than Unreal Engine. So for support for Unity, we have quite a bit already out there. For Unreal Engine, it's relatively new, but we do have support for it. So yes, the answer to your question is yes.
Okay, awesome. And I think the last question we have, sorry, Tiffany, for getting this one a little bit late. It says, what might latency, etc. issues be in a mission critical style prototype? What is the weakest link?
Mission critical. So I would probably go back to seeing which prototype of mine has is more like is more one-to-one with the telemetry. So for example, if I go back to the screens, out of the three screens here, the flight data and the communication, that's probably not mission critical since it's That's an app its own. It doesn't show anything one-to-one, so that's all right. My MFD as well. This is a little bit more mission critical, but not as much, since this one just shows the diagnostics and the controls of the plane. The flight shows the flight data, elapsed time, power. As long as that is accurate to maybe a second, that's probably fine. But when we move over to the PFD, that's probably more critical, as the data and everything, all the objects here move live. The speedometer, the altitude, your compass, all these are your heading, and your pitch and roll is very important to be one-to-one on how a plane would function, because you're flying the plane, you want this part to be um, as good of a latency as possible. So designing. So we'll probably focus more on this. But so far, with how we have designed and how we have set the time on how the telemetry passes through the simulator here, it's it's smooth enough for at least a user testing environment. You can probably set the messages to go even faster. You can play around with that on your own, but we have found our sweet spot with this prototype. Yeah.
Okay, great. Emma actually has another interesting question. She wants to know,
Of
Eric,
course.
about the simulator. Is it mainly used for flight or can it be applied to other industries as well? I think she's in a robotics company. So, like, once
Mhm.
the design is completed in Figma, like, what would be the next steps for?
That's a great question. Yes, for sure. Our primary use, like we started off as building, ProPie started off building for mobiles and desktops. Then we switched from to smart TVs and smartwatches, and then we switched to automobile and in now aviation. So for sure, we can this can easily be applicable to something more complex like robotics. Since just to going back, since you're in the robotics, starting everything on Figma, the we have a very easy, what do we call, very easy import that takes all your design one-to-one from Figma all the way directly to ProPie Studio, that you can simply just copy and paste onto the studio, or you can just use our Figma controller plugin that's in Figma, ProPie plugin in Figma, that you can import all your layers and design assets to ProPie seamlessly, and then you play around with it. We also do have open beta for ProPie MCP, so you could hook that up to your AI of choice as well, and be able to create a whole design flow that is very seamless and more interactive.
Okay, great. So, I think the last couple of questions we can reach out to you guys individually. Monica, you asked about some healthcare. We do have some examples. So, someone from our team will reach out for, something healthcare related. Eric, do you think you can,
Healthcare,
sorry, do
sorry,
you think you can kind of go to the last slide there for me? I think you were sharing the screen.
last slide. Give me a second. Sorry about that.
No worries. So like I said, thank you guys for being so interactive and taking the whole time, because we were kind of scheduled for we were thinking about 30, 40 minutes, but it's already been 50 minutes. So